Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be recapping day 13 and the final day of the second round of the NHL playoffs. The only series left to finish was Philadelphia Flyers versus the New York Islanders. The Flyers were down 3-1 after 4 games, but they managed to storm back to push the series to Game 7, but in said Game 7, the Islanders would be the team emerging victorious and finishing off this series to move on to the third round with a 4-0 victory. This one starts off with a Mayfield goal to make it 1-0 Islanders. Pretty soon after, Andy Green would make it 2-0. Eventually, Nelson would make it 3-0, and then Beauvillier to make it 4-0. The Flyers would get shut out here in what would end up being their final game of these playoffs. A rough game for the Flyers for sure. Obviously, the previous game was also a pretty rough game for the Flyers, but because of bad goaltending on the Islanders' side, the Flyers managed to stay in it and, in fact, win. This game, however, the Islanders got much better goaltending, and it was still a dominant performance by them, and they take the series. Good news for the Islanders, a great performance from them once more. We've only seen very few times during these playoffs where they have looked quite off. This is a team that's probably one of the more consistent ones left out of the 4 teams that are still remaining. This Islanders team always able to just show up when it matters, only limiting the Flyers to just 16 shots in this game, which is quite impressive to do in a Game 7, obviously, because both teams are really going to be pushing to try and get the series victory. So the fact that they were able to do that is great. And of course, Barry Trotz makes the correct call. He ends up going with Thomas Greiss, technically the backup for this Game 7. I had said he was in a very tough position to actually choose, but I had said that he should go with Thomas Greiss. He ends up doing that, and Greiss ends up paying off very well for him getting this shutout. So it seems as though come Game 1 in the next round against the Tampa Bay Lightning, Greiss will almost certainly get this first start at the very least. Varlamov may have to take the role of backup for the foreseeable future here for the Islanders. The bad news for them is that they weren't necessarily hugely challenged through these first few rounds. I mean, I wouldn't say that the Capitals weren't necessarily a tough opponent, but here against the Flyers, I feel like most people were probably quite disappointed with how the Flyers looked during these playoffs. The round robin went well for them, but they were quite disappointing against the Canadiens, which made many people give up hope for their chances against the Islanders, and that ended up being the case. The Tampa Bay Lightning, however, are going to be a much more difficult opponent. The Lightning have faced a very similar team to the Islanders already in these playoffs with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Then they also managed to easily remove the Boston Bruins, who are a team that would give the Islanders a lot of trouble just based on play style. So the Lightning will definitely be their biggest test, and who knows if they will be able to respond. The fact that this series ended up going to 7 games with how shaky the Flyers looked for a lot of it could mean not disaster, but could mean some bad things into the third round. In terms of the Flyers moving forward, things are still pretty bright for them. While it's not the case like the Canucks and the Avalanche, where the Flyers have a super bright future because all of their core are quite young, their core is more middle-aged when you look at players like Claude Giroux and Voracek around the age of 30, but they've still got a relatively deep team, a relatively young team, and of course in net, Carter Hart, one of the best young goaltenders in the NHL at the moment. He had some great moments in these playoffs, even if it was somewhat inconsistent at times. But while the Flyers might not be contenders for the next 10 years or anything like that, the Flyers definitely will be back and will be a strong team just as soon as next year in the NHL. Tough loss to take here, and maybe there are some learning experiences, and maybe some of these players who are on a bit of a cold streak during these playoffs, like Claude Giroux, will come back stronger next year. But things are still looking pretty decent for this team. That will do it for this recap. In terms of predictions, I had said the Islanders would indeed win this series, which they managed to do so. However, I did give the Flyers one less game than it took to win. I said the Islanders in 6, ended up being the Islanders in 7, but at the very least, I got the correct team. Class dismissed.